When Franklin Rhodes found the woman in black collapsed beside his water trough, he never imagined her Bible would hold more death than salvation. The dust devil had been dancing across the mesa for an hour before Franklin spotted her, a dark smudge against the endless brown of his land, moving like a wounded bird with one wing clipped. From the kitchen window where he'd been washing breakfast dishes, she looked no bigger than a tumbleweed. But tumbleweeds don't wear habits, and they don't stumble with such desperate purpose toward a man's only water. "Papa, who's that?" 8-year-old. Mabel pressed her nose against the glass, her breath fogging the pain. The morning sun caught the copper threads in her hair, so much like her mother's that Franklin's chest still tightened whenever he looked at her sideways. "Don't rightly know, little bird." He dried his hands on the flour sack towel, watching the figure grow larger with each labored step. "But she's in a powerful hurry to get nowhere fast." The woman, a nun, he realized as she drew closer, had lost her veil somewhere between here and wherever she'd come from. Her habit was torn at the hem, stained with alkali dust and something that looked suspiciously like blood. She carried herself with the rigid determination of someone who'd forgotten how to quit, even when quitting might be the sensible thing to do. Franklin stepped onto the porch, his boots echoing against the weathered planks. The morning was crisp for September, with that knife-edge quality that promised a hard winter ahead. Behind him, he could hear Mabel's bare feet pattering across the kitchen floor, probably climbing onto a chair to get a better view. "Easy. Now," he called out as the nun reached his fence line. "You're safe here." She looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, and Franklin felt something shift in his chest. Not the familiar ache of loss, but something altogether different. Alive. Dangerous, maybe. Her face was pale beneath the dust, but her jaw was set with the kind of stubbornness that had carved women like his grandmother out of wilderness stone. She began, then swayed. Franklin was over the fence before she hit the ground, catching her against his chest. She was lighter than she looked, all angles and sharp edges beneath the coarse fabric. Up close, he could see the exhaustion, carved into the lines around her eyes, the way her lips were cracked from thirst and sun. "Mabel," he called, lifting the woman easily. "Fetch some water. Cool, but not too cold." "Is she gonna die, Papa?" His daughter's voice held that matter-of-fact curiosity that children possessed about mortality, tinged with just enough worry to make his heart clench. "Not if I can help it." He carried the nun inside, settling her on the horsehair sofa that had belonged to his wife. The irony wasn't lost on him. Another woman's body in the place where Caroline used to read her books, where she'd nursed Mabel and through her first fever, where she'd breathed her last breath 3 winters ago. The nun's habit had fallen open slightly, revealing a leather cord around her neck. Something hung from it, not a cross, but something heavier, more angular. When she stirred, her hand immediately flew to her throat, checking that whatever it was remained hidden. "Where?" she whispered, her voice like wind through dry grass. "My place. The Double R Ranch." Franklin knelt beside the sofa, accepting the tin cup Mabel offered. "I'm Franklin Rhodes. This here's my daughter, Mabel." The nun's eyes sharpened, focusing on him with an intensity that made him wonder if she was cataloging his features for some purpose he couldn't fathom. "Franklin Rhodes," she repeated, as if testing the name for weight. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Most folks just call it coincidence." He helped her sit up, supporting her shoulders while she sipped the water. "What's your name, sister?" A pause. "Too long." "Sister?" "Florence. Sister Florence Ida." The hesitation was slight, but Franklin had spent enough time breaking horses to recognize when something was skittish about being touched. This woman was lying about her name, and probably about a good deal more. But then, everyone who ended up in this corner of New Mexico territory was running from something. The desert didn't much care what you called yourself, as long as you could survive what it threw at you. "Well, Sister Florence, you look like you've traveled a fair piece." He settled into the chair across from her, noting how her gaze kept drifting to the windows, as if she expected pursuit. "Where might you have come from?" Another pause. Her fingers worked at something beneath her habit, that cord around her neck again. "East," she said finally. "Much too far east." Mabel had been studying their guest with the unblinking stare that only children could manage. Now she tilted her head, curious. Why don't you have a cross like other nuns? Florence's hand stilled. It was lost. On the road. That's a shame, Mabel said solemnly. Mama always said a person needs something to hold on to when the world gets too big. The nun's face softened, and for a moment, Franklin glimpsed something beneath the wariness, a loneliness that matched his own. Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Franklin stood, needing movement to push away the familiar weight of grief. She'd have wanted me to offer you shelter, at least for tonight. Storms coming in from the west, and it's no weather for traveling. As if summoned by his words, thunder rumbled across the mesa, still distant but growing closer. The nun, Florence, looked toward the sound with something that might have been relief or might have been fear. It was hard to tell the difference sometimes. You're very kind, she said, but I shouldn't impose. There are people who might be looking for me. What kind of people? Her smile was sharp as a blade. The kind that don't much care for questions. Franklin had fought in the war, had seen enough of death and desperate men to recognize when someone was in the kind of trouble that followed you home. But he'd also seen enough of loneliness to know that sometimes a person's worst enemy was the silence they carried inside their own skin. Well, he said, seems to me those kind of people can wait until morning to cause whatever trouble they're planning. Tonight, you're under my roof. Florence's eyes filled with something that might have been gratitude or might have been tears. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. You don't know what this means. Outside, the first drops of rain began to spatter against the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, long, lonely, and wild. Franklin watched the nun's hand drift unconsciously to that hidden cord around her neck and wondered what exactly he'd invited into his home. But he wouldn't have to wonder long, because when Florence thought no one was looking, she pulled out her Bible, and the list of names tucked inside made Franklin's blood run cold. The storm hit just after supper, turning the world outside into a symphony of wind and water. Franklin had given Florence his and Caroline's bedroom, the only proper guest room in the house, while he took the small cot in what had once been his wife's sewing room. Through the thin walls, he could hear the nun moving restlessly, her boots creaking against the floorboards in a rhythm that spoke of pacing rather than rest. Mabel had taken to their guest with the easy acceptance of childhood, chattering through dinner about her lessons and her pet rabbit, Cornelius, who lived in the barn. Florence had listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she understood children, a skill that seemed odd for a cloistered nun. Do you have brothers and sisters, Sister Florence? Mabel had asked over her cornbread. I had a brother once. Florence's voice had carried a weight that made Franklin look up from his plate. He was very dear to me. What happened to him? The silence stretched long enough that Franklin was about to redirect the conversation. When Florence spoke again, he made some poor choices. Got mixed up with the wrong sort of men. Now, lying on the narrow cot with rain drumming against the roof, Franklin found himself wondering about that brother. About the way Florence's hand kept drifting to that cord around her neck. About the careful way she'd positioned herself at dinner, back to the wall, facing the door, like someone accustomed to expecting trouble. That a soft thud from the kitchen made him sit up. Then another. Someone was moving around out there, trying to be quiet, but not quite succeeding. Franklin slipped from the cot, padding barefoot across the cold floor. The hallway was dark, but a thin line of lamplight showed beneath the kitchen. Door, he found Florence at the table, her Bible open before her, and a piece of paper spread flat beside it. In the golden circle of lamplight, her face looked carved from shadow and determination. The paper was covered in neat handwriting. Names, he realized, listed in careful columns. Couldn't sleep either, he asked softly. She startled, her hand flying to cover the paper, but not before he'd seen his own name written there in her careful script. Franklin Rhodes, followed by a question mark. I didn't mean to wake you, she said, already folding the paper. Sometimes I find comfort in reading when rest won't come. That's a peculiar way to read scripture. He nodded toward the covered paper, making lists of names. Her jaw tightened. It's nothing that need concern you. When a man's name is on a list carried by a woman who won't give her real name, he tends to feel it concerns him plenty. Franklin moved closer, noting how her shoulders tensed. Why don't you tell me what's really going on, sister? For a moment, he thought she might. Her eyes held the weight of someone carrying too many secrets, and her mouth opened as if to speak. Then lightning split the sky outside, throwing harsh white light through the windows, and whatever confession had been building died on her lips. Some things are better left buried, she said instead. And some things have a way of digging themselves up whether you want them to or not. He settled into the chair across from her, the same position he'd taken that morning. Already it felt familiar, as if they'd been sitting across from each other for years instead of hours. I've got good reason to believe you're not who you say you are. And why's that? Because you ate your cornbread with your left hand, but you write with your right. Because you know children but flinch when Mabel and mentions prayer. Because you've got calluses on your trigger finger that don't come from rosary beads. He leaned forward, studying her face. But mostly because no nun I've ever met carries a Colt .45 under her habit. Florence's hand froze halfway to that cord, around her neck. You're very observant, Mr. Rhodes. I'm alive, which tends to require a certain amount of observation. He kept his voice gentle, the way he did when working with spooked horses. Now, why don't you tell me what kind of trouble you're in? Maybe I can help. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Help? Mr. Rhodes, you have no idea what you're offering. Then explain it to me. For a long moment, the only sound was rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she said, My name is Winifred Bly. The name hit him like a physical blow. Every man west of the Mississippi knew that name, had seen it on wanted posters, heard it whispered in saloons and around campfires. Winifred Bly, the woman who'd ridden with the Barlow gang until she disappeared 3 years ago. Some said she'd been killed in a botched robbery. Others claimed she'd run off with the gang's money. Nobody said she'd become a nun. Sweet Jesus, he breathed. I know what you're thinking, she said quickly. But I'm not. I'm not that person anymore. I haven't been for a long time. That person killed 12 men. That person was trying to survive in a world that gave her damn few choices. Her voice carried an edge now, sharp as winter wind. And before you ask, no, I didn't kill them all. But I killed enough. Franklin felt the weight of the gun he kept in the kitchen drawer, 3 feet away from where they sat. Winifred Bly was fast enough to have that Colt out and aimed before he could blink. But she hadn't drawn it. She was sitting there, hands flat on the table, waiting for his judgment. Why the nun's habit? He asked. Because nobody looks twice at a sister. Because it's about as far from Winifred Bly as a person can get. She touched the cord around her neck. And because I thought if I could pray hard enough, long enough, maybe I could wash the blood off my hands. And the list. Her face went stone cold. The Barlow gang didn't just rob banks. Mr. Rhodes. They were hired guns, killers for whoever paid best. And 3 years ago, they took a job that. She swallowed hard. That went too far. Even for them. What kind of job? The kind that gets entire families murdered in their sleep. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Including a family named Greeley. A man named Hiram Greeley, his wife, his 3 children. Franklin's blood chilled. He'd heard about the Greeley massacre. Everyone had. A respected businessman and his family, slaughtered in their beds in Santa Fe. The law had never found the killers. The list, he said slowly, it's not a death list. It's a list of targets. She corrected. The Greeley job was supposed to be the last one. But Nathaniel Barlow, the gang's leader, he had other ideas. He wanted to keep going, keep killing. So I took the list and I ran. And now I'm trying to warn the people on it. The people who are still alive. She met his eyes. Starting with you. Outside, the storm was reaching its peak, wind howling around the house like something wild and hungry. Franklin thought about Mabel and, asleep in her bed, trusting him to keep her safe. About the life he'd built here, quiet and simple and far from the violence that had once defined his younger days. Mr. Rhodes, Winifred said, and her voice carried a desperation that cut straight through him. They're coming. Nathaniel Barlow and what's left of his gang. They know I have the list. And they know I'm trying to warn people. They won't stop until they've killed everyone on it. Including me. Including you. She leaned forward, her storm cloud eyes fierce with urgency. But there's something else. Something I didn't know until I saw your name written down. The lamplight flickered, throwing dancing shadows across her face as she reached for that cord around her neck. And Franklin realized that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything, that Winifred's fingers closed around whatever hung from that leather cord. And when she pulled it free, Franklin's world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a religious medallion or a locket. It was a small brass button, tarnished with age but still recognizable, the kind that had once adorned a Union cavalry officer's uniform. His uniform. Where did you get that? The words came out rougher than he'd intended, carrying the weight of memories he'd spent years trying to bury. From a dead man named Thomas Bly, she said quietly. My brother. He was wearing it when they found his body outside Albuquerque 2 years ago. Franklin's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where that same button had once fastened his blue coat, where it had caught the light during the charge at Glorieta Pass, where it had been torn loose during the retreat from Apache Canyon. Thomas Bly, he repeated, the name stirring something in the depths of his memory. He rode with your unit during the war, the 1st Colorado Volunteers. Winifred's voice was steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the button. He used to talk about a captain who'd saved his life during a Confederate ambush, a man named Franklin Rhodes. The pieces clicked into place like tumblers in a lock. Thomas Bly, young, eager, with the same storm cloud eyes as his sister. Franklin remembered him now, barely 18, full of ideals and terror in equal measure. The boy who'd frozen during his first battle until Franklin had dragged him behind cover, who'd looked at him afterward like he'd hung the moon. Tommy, Franklin breathed. He was just a kid. He was my little brother. Winifred's voice cracked on the words. And he worshipped you. Came home from the war full of stories about Captain Rhodes, the man who'd taught him what honor looked like. Then why? Because honor doesn't put food on the table or keep a roof over your head. Her laugh was bitter as alkali water. Tommy came back to nothing. Our parents were dead, the farm was gone, and nobody wanted to hire a soldier who shook every time he heard a loud noise. So he started taking jobs with men who didn't ask questions about his past. Franklin felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders. How many boys had he led into battle, only to watch them stumble home broken? How many had he failed to save after the war ended? He died because of me, Winifred continued, her voice gaining strength. I got him involved with Barlow's gang, told him it was just one job, enough money to get us both out of that life. But Nathaniel Barlow doesn't let people walk away. When Tommy tried to leave after the Greeley job, when he said he couldn't stomach any more killing, she closed her eyes. They made it look like a robbery gone wrong. So you took the list to honor his memory. I took the list because I was a coward. The words came out like a confession. Because I couldn't face what we'd done, what I'd led my brother into. Because maybe, if I saved the people we were supposed to kill, it would somehow balance the scales. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, the thunder moving further away. But inside the kitchen, the air felt charged with a different kind of electricity. Franklin found himself studying this woman who'd been 3 different people in the span of a day: the mysterious nun, the notorious outlaw, the grieving sister. Which one was real? There's more, Winifred said, unfolding the paper she'd been trying to hide. The reason your name is on this list, it's not random. Franklin leaned forward, reading the names by lamplight. Some he recognized, businessmen. From Santa Fe, a territorial judge, a newspaper editor who'd been vocal about cleaning up the territory. Others meant nothing to him. But his own name was there, written in a different hand than the others. Nathaniel Barlow added your name personally, Winifred explained. After Tommy died, he knew about the connection between you and my brother, knew that Tommy had spoken of you often. He wanted to hurt me, and he figured killing the man Tommy had admired most would be the perfect way to do it. A message written in blood. Exactly. She refolded the paper with careful precision. But there's something else. Something I didn't realize until I got here and saw how you live, saw your daughter. Franklin's blood turned to ice water. Mabel, and she's not on the list yet. But Nathaniel Barlow has a particular hatred for lawmen and soldiers. And he has a particular way of making sure his messages are understood. Winifred's voice was barely a whisper now. He doesn't just kill his targets, Mr. Rhodes. He destroys everything they love first. The words hit Franklin like a physical blow. He thought of Mabel and, sleeping peacefully in her bed, trusting him to keep her safe. Thought of Caroline, who'd already paid the price for his past in ways he'd never wanted to examine too closely. How long do we have? There may be 2 days behind me. Maybe less. Winifred stood, pacing to the window. I've been trying to stay ahead of them, warn people, but they're good at what they do. Patient. They like to take their time with their work. Franklin's mind was already working, calculating distances and possibilities. We could run, take Mabel, and head for Denver. Or California. Start over somewhere they'll never find us. You could, Winifred agreed. But they'd find you eventually. And what about the other names on the list? The judge with 3 grandchildren? The newspaper editor who's been fighting corruption? That's not my responsibility, isn't it? She turned from the window, and in the lamplight, she looked like an avenging angel. You taught my brother about honor, about standing up for what's right. Are you going to tell me those were just pretty words? Franklin felt the weight of old choices, old obligations. The captain he'd been during the war wouldn't have hesitated. But the father he'd become, the man who'd already lost one woman to violence. There's another way, Winifred said quietly. A way to end this without running, without waiting for them to pick us off one by one. I'm listening. We make a stand. Here, use your knowledge of the land, my knowledge of how they think. Turn the hunters into the hunted. She moved closer, and he could see the steel in her eyes. But it would mean trusting me. A woman who's lied to you, who's brought death to your doorstep. Franklin looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the notorious Winifred Bly or the mysterious Sister Florence, but a woman who'd lost everything and was trying to build something from the ashes. A woman who'd crossed the territory to warn strangers, who'd put herself at risk for people she'd never met. What did you have in mind? Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the dying storm. The distant thunder of hoofbeats, riding hard through the night. Multiple horses coming from the east. Winifred's face went pale. They're here, she whispered. God help us all. They're here. Franklin was already moving, heading for the gun cabinet. How many? 4, maybe 5. But Mr. Rhodes, Franklin, you need to understand something. Winifred's voice stopped him cold. Nathaniel Barlow isn't just coming to kill you. He's coming to make you watch your daughter die first. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder, and Franklin realized that everything he'd thought he knew about keeping his family safe was about to be put to the ultimate test. That Franklin's hands moved with practiced efficiency, loading his Winchester while his mind raced through possibilities. The hoofbeats were closer now, close enough to count. 5 horses, maybe 6. Too many for a straight fight, especially with Mabel and in the house. The root cellar, he said, already moving toward his daughter's room. Behind the kitchen. It's where Caroline used to store preserves, but it's deep enough, and no. Winifred's voice cut through his planning like a blade. They'll find her. Nathaniel Barlow doesn't leave loose ends, and he knows how to make people talk. Franklin's blood turned to winter. Then what do you suggest? We give them what they want. She was checking her Colt now, her movements swift and sure. Me? Like hell. Listen to me. She grabbed his arm as he started past her. I know these men. I know how they think. Barlow wants me to suffer before I die, wants to make me watch while he destroys everything I care about. But he's also arrogant. He'll want to gloat, to tell me exactly how he's going to kill everyone on that list. And that helps us how? Because while he's talking, we'll be planning. Her grip tightened. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Franklin looked into her storm cloud eyes and saw something that made his decision for him. Not desperation, not fear, but a cold, calculating fury that reminded him of the best soldiers he'd known, the ones who'd learned to turn their pain into purpose. Tell me what you need. Get Mabel, and quietly. Bring her to the kitchen, but keep her calm. No matter what she sees or hears, she needs to stay quiet. Winifred moved to the window, peering through the curtains. And Franklin, when the time comes, when I give you the signal, you take her and run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just run. What signal? You'll know. The hoofbeats stopped. Franklin's trained ear caught the subtle sounds of men dismounting, of whispered orders and weapons being checked. Professional sounds. These weren't common thieves or drifters. They were killers, and they knew their business. He slipped into Mabel Ann's room, gently shaking her awake. She blinked up at him, copper hair tousled. With sleep. Papa? What's wrong? Nothing for you to worry about, little bird. He kept his voice steady, normal. but I need you to come with me." Very quietly, she nodded, trusting him completely, and the weight of that trust nearly broke his heart. He lifted her in his arms, feeling her small body relax against his chest. Whatever happened next, he had to keep her safe. Nothing else mattered. In the kitchen, Winifred had positioned herself by the door, her nun's habit discarded in favor of practical clothes, dark pants, and a shirt that wouldn't catch on things. If she had to move fast, she looked like what she was, a woman who'd survived by being faster and deadlier than everyone else. "Remember," she whispered as Boots approached the porch, "when I give the signal." The knock came like thunder, 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the house. Franklin set Mabel and down behind the kitchen table, motioning for her to stay low. "Franklin Rhodes," a voice called through the door. Cultured, almost gentle. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Winifred took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door. The man standing there was nothing like Franklin had expected. Nathaniel Barlow was tall and lean, dressed like a gentleman in a fine black coat and string tie. He might have been a preacher or a traveling salesman, except for his eyes, pale blue and completely empty of warmth. "Hello, Winifred," he said, as if greeting an old friend. "You've led us quite a chase." "Nathaniel." Her voice was steady, but Franklin could see the tension in her shoulders. "I figured you'd come eventually." "Of course you did. You always were. The smart one." Barlow stepped inside without invitation, his men flowing in behind him, 4 hard-faced killers with the kind of scars that came from violent living. Though I must say, the nun disguise was inspired. Who would have thought Winifred Bly would find religion? People change, do they? Barlow's smile was sharp as a knife. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're still stealing from me. Still running away when things get difficult." Franklin watched the exchange, noting how Barlow's men positioned themselves, covering the windows, blocking the exits. These weren't men who left things to chance. "I took the list to protect innocent people," Winifred said. "Innocent?" Barlow laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Mr. Rhodes here killed 17 Confederate soldiers at Glorieta Pass. Hardly innocent. Blood on his hands. That was war. And this isn't." Barlow's voice hardened. "You betrayed your own kind, Winifred. You stole from me, killed 2 of my men, and ran off with information that could hang us all. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" From behind the table, Mabel and whimpered softly. Barlow's head snapped toward the sound, his pale eyes lighting up with something that made Franklin's skin crawl. "And who might this be?" Barlow took a step toward the table. "Don't tell me the famous Franklin Rhodes has a weakness." Franklin moved instinctively, putting himself between Barlow and his daughter. "Leave her out of this." "Oh, but she's the whole point, isn't she?" Barlow's smile returned, wider now. "Winifred needs to understand the price of betrayal. And what better way to teach that lesson than to let her watch an innocent child pay for her mistakes?" "You bastard." Winifred's hand moved toward her gun. Ah. Barlow's men raised their weapons simultaneously. "Let's not be hasty. We have so much to discuss first." That's when Franklin heard it, a sound that made his blood sing with recognition. The distinctive whistle of cavalry sabers cutting through air, followed by the thunder of hoofbeats. Not 5 or 6 horses this time, but dozens. Barlow frowned, turning toward the sound. "What?" The kitchen window exploded inward as a rope came sailing through, followed by a man in a familiar blue uniform. Then another, and another. "Franklin." The voice belonged to Major Samuel Torres, Franklin's old commanding officer. "Down." Franklin threw himself over Mabel, and as the room erupted in gunfire. Through the chaos, he saw Winifred moving like liquid. "Death," her Colt speaking in sharp, precise sentences. One of Barlow's men went down, then another. "The signal," she shouted over the gunfire. "Now." Franklin scooped up Mabel and dove for the back door, but Barlow was there, his own gun drawn, and aimed at the child's head. "I don't think so," Barlow snarled. "Nobody leaves until I get what I came for." That's when Winifred did something that would have been impossible for anyone else. She smiled. "You want to know what you came for, Nathaniel?" Her voice was deadly calm. "You came for justice. And justice has a name." She raised her hand, and Franklin saw what she'd been hiding. A small brass whistle, the kind used by cavalry officers to signal charges. The sound that pierced the night wasn't just a signal. It was a promise, and Franklin realized that the war had finally come home. The whistle's note hung in the air like a prayer answered, and suddenly the night came alive with the sound Franklin had thought he'd never hear again. The battle cry of the 1st Colorado Volunteers, echoing across the mesa like thunder from heaven itself. Barlow's head snapped toward the sound, his gun wavering for just an instant. That instant was all Winifred needed. She moved like lightning given form, diving sideways as her Colt barked twice. Barlow screamed, his weapon spinning from fingers suddenly slick with blood. Franklin pulled Mabel in behind the overturned table. As blue-uniformed soldiers poured through every window and door, their Spencer repeaters speaking in unified chorus. "Surrender now, and you'll live to see trial," Major Torres shouted over the gunfire. "Fight, and you'll meet your maker tonight." The remaining members of Barlow's gang, faced with overwhelming odds, chose poorly. The gunfight lasted perhaps 30 seconds, long enough for Franklin to shield his daughter's eyes, long enough for Justice to speak in languages of fire and lead. When the smoke cleared, Nathaniel Barlow lay crumpled against the far wall, his pale eyes staring at nothing. His men had chosen to die rather than face the hangman's rope, and the kitchen that had seen so many peaceful mornings now bore the scars of violence finally ended. "Franklin." Major Torres crossed the room in quick strides, his weathered face creased with concern. "Are you hurt? Is the child—" "We're fine, Sam." Franklin stood slowly, Mabel clinging to his neck like a frightened bird. Thanks to some timely intervention. Torres glanced at Winifred, who was reloading her Colt, with practiced efficiency despite a graze along her left arm. "The lady sent word 3 days ago. Told us you might need assistance dealing with some unfinished business from the war." Franklin looked at Winifred with new understanding. "You planned this. All of it, not all of it." She holstered her weapon, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her wounded arm. "I hope to warn you and move on. But when I realized who you were, what you meant to my brother," she shrugged. "Some debts can only be paid in full. And the cavalry just happened to be nearby." Torres grinned. "Let's just say when Winifred Bly asks for a favor in the name of a fallen soldier, certain people listen. Especially when she promises to testify against some very dangerous men in exchange for amnesty." Amnesty. Franklin felt something shift. In his chest, a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. "Full pardon for past crimes, signed by the territorial governor himself," Torres confirmed. "Seems Miss Bly has information about more than just the Barlow gang. Railroad corruption, political, murder, cattle rustling operations, enough to clean up half the territory." Winifred was studying the floor as if it held great fascination. "It was the least I could do. For Tommy. For all the people on that list who won't have to live in fear anymore." Franklin gently set Mabel down, noting how she immediately moved to stand beside Winifred. His daughter had always been a good judge of character. "Is the bad man gone, Papa?" Mabel asked in a small voice. "Yes, little bird. He's gone." Franklin knelt beside her, smoothing her copper hair. "And he's never coming back." "Good." She turned to Winifred with solemn eyes. "Are you going away too?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and Franklin found himself holding his breath. Winifred looked at him, then at Mabel, and then at the kitchen that would need rebuilding, the life that would need mending. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've spent so long running. I'm not sure I remember how to stay in one place." "You could learn," Franklin said quietly, "if you wanted to." "And what would I do? I'm not exactly qualified for respectable work." "You could start by helping me fix this kitchen." He gestured at the bullet holes and overturned furniture. "Then maybe help with the ranch. I could use someone who knows how to handle trouble. I am trouble. So was I once." Franklin moved closer, noting how she didn't step away. "The war made killers of us all. But the war's over, Winifred. Maybe it's time we learned how to live again." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw something in her storm cloud eyes that might have been hope. "You trust me? After everything, you risked your life to save mine. Save my daughter from a madman. I'd say that makes you family." "Family," she repeated, as if testing the word's weight. "We could be a real family." Mabel piped up with the unconscious wisdom of childhood. "You could be my mama, and Papa could teach you how to make cornbread, and we could all take care of Cornelius together." Winifred laughed, and the sound was like water in the desert, clean and sweet and life-giving. I think I'd like that very much. Franklin reached out, gently touching the brass button she still wore around her neck. Tommy would have liked knowing his sacrifice meant something, that it brought us together. He always said you were the finest man he'd ever known. Winifred's voice was soft with memory. I used to think he was just a boy, making heroes out of ordinary men. But I understand now. I'm no hero, just a man trying to do right by the people he loves. Maybe that's what heroes really are. Outside, dawn was breaking over the mesa, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and bright with possibility. Through the broken window, Franklin could see wild roses blooming along the fence line, Caroline's. Roses, the ones she'd planted the year Mabel and was born. Look, Papa, Mabel pointed toward the flowers. Mama's roses are blooming again. Franklin felt tears sting his eyes as he watched the sunrise illuminate the pink blossoms. Caroline would have liked Winifred, he realized. Would have seen, past the reputation to the woman beneath, strong and fierce and capable of great love. Yes, little bird, he said, wrapping his arms around both his daughter and the woman who'd brought hope back into their lives. They're blooming again. As the sun climbed higher, washing the last shadows from the land, Franklin Rhodes understood that some storms came not to destroy, but to clear away what was broken and make room for new growth. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, and the future stretched ahead like an open road that if this tale of love found in the midst of danger stirred your heart like a summer storm, don't forget to give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're hankering for more stories of romance and redemption under the wide western sky, make sure to subscribe for more tales that'll keep you on the edge of your saddle. Speaking of which, we'd love to know, where in this great wide world are you watching from today? Drop a comment and let us know what corner of creation you're calling home.